I'm going to start with an apology. I didn't bring it, I forgot my flash drive. There is not going to be a screen, and for the Zoomies, there won't be anything to display. So instead, there's a handout which I realize is in very fine print, and we will post something we'll send something out on eConnect with all the slides. And I don't know if more people will be coming in. We also need to discuss at the end of today how we're going to manage the next several weeks, because I won't be here and Carolyn won't be here, and with the tech issues will be a little bit difficult. Anyway, I wish Nancy was here. Last week, of course, Nancy introduced us to this book, and I see many people bringing it in with them. Beyond Resistance, the Institutional Church Meets the Postmodern World. And today I'm going to try to help us delve a little further. Because what does Dorhauer see or believe or perhaps only imagine to be an evolution of the Christian church, what he calls the Church 3.0? Actually, I think what he's trying to say is there is a kind of a Christianity 3.0 that doesn't depend on the orthodoxy of previous forms of church. And we'll need to acquaint ourselves and examine some of those theories of his. But I think most importantly, all of this is to provide us with a way to look honestly and critically at ourselves and how do we fit into the models that he's proposing. I put, the sidewalk sign says TOTB, thinking outside the box. I think Dorhauer is very helpful to us in being able to define what the box looks like. And then we have to begin to think how we can think outside that box. I think that our starting point is this, that we can all agree that downtown faces challenges related to his membership and his finances. There's a vague sense that the energy and the purposefulness of past years has somehow gone somewhat missing. And there's a sense of how we relate to each other might be better. And we certainly wish that more people could come in to join us in worship. But none of these challenges has simple solutions. There's no single initiative, no single program that could change or solve our problems. Matthew 25 was a goal, but it does not really provide a process or mechanism. We still have a lot of work to do. And I believe that this is our reality. This is the reality. We're an older, predominantly white, aging congregation with a very solid, a very beautiful building, and a huge, almost huge, very large endowment. But we're not attracting new tenants and new members fast enough. And there is a danger that the endowment will be exhausted within the next decade. So Nancy tried last week to turn our attention away from the question, is Dupsy dying, to a hope for resurrection, because that is how Christianity is based. There's a Holy Spirit that can create new life, and it does that always. So how do we maintain a hope in, and how do we work for a resurrection of Downtown United Presbyterian Church? And if a resurrection, in what form? The whole idea of resurrection is that it's a new life in a different form. These are important questions for now, but we'll have to find these are just the questions. We have to find the answers if we are to avoid dying, whatever that might mean. So reading this book, we realize that Dupsy's specific reality is similar to realities that other churches are confronting. And Susan Orr reminded us several weeks ago that the Presbytery of the Genesee Valley estimates that another quarter of Presbyterian churches will close within the next decade. Dorhauer identifies these three cultural and social issues that explain the reality of declining membership and participation. There's a decline in birth rates. There's the cost of building maintenance, and there's this issue of what postmodernity means. Hi, Nancy. I forgot my flash drive. Yeah. So we'll get into what postmodernity means in a moment, but I think we have a hope, and I want to believe it's not just wishful thinking. I think that we have to have this hope that downtown can define and coalesce around a vision for a viable future. Nancy last week reminded us there is a process. There's a definite process, necessary steps to find new hope. That process will involve grieving and then believing and also perception, perceiving. The church This community needs to grieve the losses and changes. I forgot my flash drive. We need to grieve the losses and changes that we have faced, those that have occurred, but also many that we still have to face. It will involve believing that change can somehow be managed, that it will take wise leadership, a lot of participation, honest expression, as well as communication and listening, that eventually and somehow we can agree on what has to stay and what has to go. Finally, Nancy reminded us that there is a need for perceiving beyond the hope, beyond the despair into a hope, despite these so-called realities. Dorhauer says that to be a Christian means to believe that death is not the final word, but resurrection is. And is that something we still, or do we really believe that? The perceiving will always involve having a faith that the Holy Spirit will not abandon the world or abandon the church. It is always there, but we have to tap into it. It means finding a purpose, meaning, a connection to something beyond ourselves. Perceiving means to see beyond what we can physically see, what we can measure, and what we can count. And that's what Einstein also said. He's said to have said, at least, that not everything that matters can be counted, and not everything that counts can be counted matters. For the church, it means that we have to look beyond the membership and the budget issues and back to the issues of mission, as Nancy introduced last week. We have to always maintain these questions. What are the sources of hope for downtown, and what strengths and opportunities do we still have? And ultimately, a church is birthed for mission. That is what Dorhauer starts with. That's what he reminds us to constantly refer to. It is an inspiring motto. The church is birthed for mission. But in our lives, it really will come down to asking what mission is downtown meant for in particular. What do we want downtown to pursue, despite the declining numbers and the considerable costs of maintaining our buildings plural? Dorhauer honestly believes that some churches will have to die. They no longer will have a physical presence. And for them, the remaining question becomes, how do you die with dignity? When membership and resources dwindle or not replaced, will the church disappear without a trace in history? Or will there be a chance to preserve and send forth some kind of legacy to pass on what it stood for, either through its money, its people, or its mission? So we'll be called on in the next few months to wrestle with these questions over and over and over again. There will continue to be losses to grieve, and we'll try to find consensus on what we can, attach our hopes to, but also to do that, what we have to give up. As someone once said in my life, in a completely different context, will we experience this time as a Good Friday, or will we find hope and purpose as an Easter people? And what does that mean to be rebirthed? This struggle is more than metaphysics and meaning. Dorhauer emphasizes in his book that a major reason for decline in church membership is the confrontation with postmodernity. And what does that mean? The term, of course, is very broad. It applies primarily to analyzing on it applies mostly to Western modes of thought, how Western minds perceive the world. And we should appreciate his contribution, but we should also be careful to exercise critical thinking about his models of postmodern. He doesn't actually talk about pre-modern thought or modern thought. He really talks about postmodern, but I thought I would throw in something about what pre-modern and modern might mean. I think pre-modern means kind of, not the pre-Christian, but the Greco-Roman and then the medieval ways of looking. Heschel, of course, reminds us that it was not only with Jewish theology was the dignity of humankind, all mankind, introduced out of a belief and an understanding that humankind was created in the likeness of God. That's not something that comes from other disciplines, other religions. And Jesus, of course, came out of that Jewish tradition. Of course, then the Western Church modified their tradition and codified it as a theology. As Richard Rohr has said, the church changed that Christ message so much that it was more perhaps to Neoplatonic thought about dualisms and order, perhaps than to Jesus' teaching and example. And then we come to medieval thought. This is all, this is all the pre-modern period. Medieval thought, the best and the brightest of their time, created a worldview that sought explanations of the origins and purposes and meaning and found answers. The medieval answers were hierarchical, they're stable and orderly by their standards, and that was the world that created Church 1.0. And we should remind ourselves, concomitantly with medieval Christianity, there were other viable metaphysics, worldviews: Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, Confucian, Aztec, indigenous, and those impulses to make meaning and to find explanation are also remarkable and apparently universal traits. So there's always this wish to make meaning of existence and why we're here. And the challenge of our times is that we do not have a global sensibility, a global spirituality to explain and motivate, inspire, to go along with our awareness of the increasingly global problems and interdependence that we have. So we are meant perhaps to contribute our small part to that process. Now then we come to the modern period. And modern, Dorhauer describes as a characteristic thought model of the past 500 years or so, at least in Western civilization. He rather lumps, the Renaissance, Enlightenment, and the 19th and 20th centuries. But these are centuries where technology and dissemination of knowledge created a sense that science and reason could lead to ever better lives for humankind. And even then, as it confronted industrialization, modernism, defined by Wikipedia as a socially progressive trend of thought that affirms the power of human beings to create, improve, and reshape their environment. We're in that modernist period.
Would you repeat that?
The modernist period is a socially progressive trend of thought that affirms the power of human beings to create, improve, and reshape their environment. It might be called an attitude that individuals and societies would cease to be victims of history, but instead become their creators. That's the modernism by, the people who write about these things. And then we have the postmodern. Postmodern thoughts began to take hold after the horrors of 2 world wars, a Holocaust, atom bomb, totalitarian governments, and with climate change, et cetera now. We're not so great, right, at being modern. So we were kind of in this postmodern period where it questions its predecessors, both intellectual and spiritual. Is there really a benevolent God? Is the beauty of Shakespeare only relevant for Western Europeans? Is humanity destined to improve always, or might it destroy itself? Is gender really absolute? And what are objective facts? So we were in a period where all these questions have been raised. And Dorhauer says, I think we have to pass through this. We don't know what's on the other side. More order, or just somehow, we don't know, do we? And we're in the midst of that. There are many implications of having a postmodern point of view. For our purposes today, there are 3 generalizations that Dorhauer offers. His first statement is that postmoderns do not believe that there is such a thing as universal truth. In other words, what is true for you may or may not be true for me. They believe that all knowledge is contingent on personal and cultural influence. There are no absolutes. That's the first principle. I think you said that last week, Nancy. His second relates to how technology has changed how individuals, how we just gather information, how we learn. No longer is there a teacher, an authority figure with a passive learner of lower status. The whole world of the internet and social media are available, and postmoderns do value that and do not want to give up on that. His third statement results from the first 2 phenomena. Institutional authority, therefore, which are the ones that are based on hierarchies, would be objectionable to a view that denies a view that already denies universality of any reality and prioritizes the importance of individual and subjective experiences. Your experience, my experience are intrinsically different, and how are we ever going to make common cause out of that? So that's the challenge of being postmodern. remember you saying that regardless of what you may believe and how you may think, there are others with a postmodern mindset. We may all be very comforted by coming to this church 2.0, as he calls it. But there is a postmodern mindset out there, and it is thriving. So how postmodern do we feel we are? And how most postmodern do we want to be? Is that us? Is that you? Are we really postmodern? I mean, I think that is kind of trendy to feel like we're postmodern. But hell, we're here in a Presbyterian church that's been here for 150 years. Are we really postmodern, or are we just modern? And how will we relate to that world of postmoderns? How do we respond to this idea? I don't believe that there is truth with a capital T. What kind of role is there then for a Christian church for postmodern people? That, I think, is what Dorhauer is confronting us and challenging us with. So in this context of the growing skepticism, do we want to stop there and just ask how we want to deal with that? So, are we postmodern? I mean, Kim.
I whispered out of turn that I think we're at 2.5, and that I think we have been in many ways for 30 or 40 years. Not that we don't have a long way to go, but I think when you know and talk to most of the members here, I don't know how many think there's absolute truth, and I don't want to speak for others, but I think there's a common understanding of the universality of other ways, other religions, and I think we have a little bit of a step up there philosophically.
Yeah. In the face of uncertainty, we don't retreat to dogma.
I think there may be a little bit of bristling to a lot of top-down in this congregation.
A little bit.
This is not a question, but I'm having trouble hearing some of what you say, and I'm really, that distresses me because it sounds very interesting, but, I'm wondering if you could just be a little closer to the microphone, or is that okay? No?
Are other people feeling that?
Yeah.
The microphone's fuzzy.
It's the mic. Oh, it's the mic? Because it's really not really very good.
You mentioned.
Do you want me to start all over? Is this better? And I have to keep it close and need to listen for it to be loud enough. Is this better?
Yes.
Oh, yes. And there are people here that struggle. I'm sorry. It's okay. How postmodern are we? How postmodern should we strive to be? Are we merely modern? You know, with this. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I just got this. I mentioned I had this peculiar personal response to the whole idea of postmodernism. And my first thought was, this is bad news. This is kind of the end of things. This modern optimism that we're always getting better, and the world is going in the right direction, and democracy is spreading. And then we've had the last 10 to 20 years where it's looking like the opposite. And then, this is such a personal response, so I'm not even sure how understandable it can be. But there was kind of this sense as I was growing up that, the world is supposed to be a better place than this, and what's wrong with this world? Why do we still have different kinds of prejudices that we have to deal with? We're better than this. And then the postmodern kind of brought it to a head that, oh, hey, it never was going to be this perfect place. And it's more like we have to accept the fact that there is poverty, that there is injustice, and to be realistic about this, and that it becomes important then that we as individuals and as a community do something about this, and not, we just can't sit by and just assume that things are going to work well. And I think a little bit about the early church, that they were a minority group that had to struggle against the thoughts and even the prejudices of the day, of that day. And I found that kind of liberating, with more of a sense of purpose for my life, even though I've always been idealistic. But it becomes much more critical that we as individuals and as a community take action. And so I've found this initial pessimism as liberating in some ways. I'm still grappling with that, and surprised by the paradoxical effect.
This is a question from Marie and Peg. In Dorhauer's talk to Presbytery, he talked about a third era after postmodern that might be emerging. Can you address that? And she goes on to quickly say, unfortunately, didn't take notes and don't remember what he called it, but I do remember thinking that Dupsy is moving into that third place.
That, you know, I think Marie and Peg referred to his video, I believe, and he asked us, you know, what is there beyond this, that there is a third place? And I think that was in the question and answer period. I didn't get to that. There is a video, I think, that we will share that again, about what he had said about the postmodern world. And I'm sorry, I didn't, had anyone looked through the rest of the video and seen how he answered that question?
I didn't see the video, but in the book, when he talks about Church 3.0, he says that is, we may not see that for 300 years, and that it's a long, slow process. And he's optimistic about it because, like, Church 1.0 was up until Luther, after Christ till Luther, then Luther to today is 2, and we're creeping, and then 3, kind of what we were talking about, will be beyond the sense of futility and more into mission and universality of belief, that kind of thing. That's what I remember.
I think as well that from the video, which I did watch, but it's been a while ago, mirrors what Kim was just saying, that we don't know what that next 500 chunk of time will be at this point. But I'm sorry if that does not answer correctly, and I will rewatch that video part to get a better sense. Thanks, Marie and Peg.
I just wanted to bring up what he talked about, prophetic imagination. And that to me is like what keeps me from being like, oh my gosh, the church is going to end. And I don't know, and he also says, we do not face grief as others who have no hope. So this isn't us doing this on our own steam. And I think that that's something that I always come back to, like, there's the human aspect to it. There's us working, being in a mission, all of that. But then there's the Holy Spirit guiding us. There's God. And I think that if if we have to hold on to that prophetic imagination and just realize that we're not doing this by ourselves. So if anyone is having a hard time with this book, as I know I was having some moments, that really helped kind of put me back on a more positive track.
Oh, it is a period of disorder, and the old orders are changing and the new orders haven't begun yet. That's, I guess, our task in our remaining lifetimes is to advance that sense that there can be a reorder on the other side. But it's, I suppose during our lifetimes, it's become evident that the disorder has been getting greater.
Thank you, Maria and Peg. Just to comment and follow up on Raina. Yes, we believe the future for us can and will be hopeful. Thank you. Maria and Peg said, yes, we believe that the future can and will be hopeful for us.
Good morning. I should identify myself. I'm Lyle, one of the Quakers downstairs. I don't mean to be a spy or an outlier.
A missionary.
When I'm not being a Quaker downstairs, I'm part of the United Church of Christ, and that you're grappling with Dorhauer's vision is hopeful to me. This discussion is helping me understand in a deeper way some of what our Genesee Valley Association of the United Church of Christ and your Presbytery of the Genesee Valley have been doing cooperatively in recent years. I worked very closely with Susan Orr as we were reconfiguring the resource library and tearing our hair out. Nobody is paying any attention to these wonderful Sunday school curriculum materials, and they're just sitting here gathering dust. The GVA and the Presbyterian libraries were combined and then relocated and downsized, and Susan's portfolio is quite different now than when she was checking out Sunday school curricula resources. And we were despairing at the time of letting go of these wonderful traditional historical ways of learning. At the same time, we knew that teachers were going on the internet and getting resources in ways that our library just wasn't equipped to provide. So kicking and screaming out of 2.0, moving toward 3.0 perhaps. It's been a challenge for us as friends to let go of a large facility that we didn't need and weren't utilizing in a creative way. And it feels right to be here and sharing resources. Working with Eileen, we hope to be able to display perhaps in your pastoral care office, which is now housing our very modest Quaker library, a wonderful, I think of it as iconic Quaker theology. It's a print of the Edward Hicks Peaceable Kingdom from a couple of centuries ago. We're not ready to kick that to the curb and say, oh, the peaceable kingdom is pie in the sky theology that, as we look around, is proven to be unfounded and maybe a bit delusional. We're still there. We're still looking for the day when the lamb and the lion lie down together. This discussion is helping me reflect on some of what I wasn't able to put words on when I was in the middle of packing up boxes of dusty old Sunday school books and putting them on the giveaway table. Here we are now, and it's the age of thumb drives. And sometimes we do just well without a thumb drive too.
Well, welcome, and thank you for reminding us that there's not just a Presbyterian way of seeing things.
Invite your friends too.
Yes. Friends who are friends.
So there was a church 1.0 that relied on scripture and tradition and authority, and then there was a church 2.0 that Dorhauer proposes that evolved after really after centuries of quite bloody conflict. Right, we're here now. And Church 1.0 with its traditions, it mostly coexists with Church 2.0. And Church 2.0, Dorhauer says, largely discarded the unquestioning reliance on Pope and priest, discarded many traditions and sacraments. And this Church 2.0 relies, he claims, on scripture and faith and grace. There are many Protestant denominations, though, aren't there? And so how the scripture and faith and grace are expressed is quite variable. But those are the three foundations. And the Friends, of course, are perhaps one of the more advanced in some ways because there is less of a system of ordination. And I think that's one thing that Dorhauer suggests, that the next evolution will move, to find some other ways of approaching orthodoxy without systems of training, without systems of testing and authorizing of clergy, and also perhaps moving away from beautiful buildings that somehow carry all sorts of symbolism.
David, could I just interrupt your thought for a minute, because I'm sitting here, thank you. I'm sitting here while you're talking, thinking, I confess, politically. And my observation is that the church that is growing, and I guess it's a 2.0, but is the evangelical church. And quite honestly, that is very disturbing to me, especially in the ways that they're shaping it and selling it. And so I'm wondering, is any part of our job here in the here and now, because here we are in the here and now, to confront that, and I don't know if confront is the right word, but it's just very disturbing to me. So that's all.
Anybody else? There must be some responses to that.
Yeah, I feel the same way that Elaine does. It does so much damage, especially post-Trump. But one thing he said in the book that did make me feel better is he said, even the evangelical churches that used to be at the forefront of growing are slowing down. And, this isn't very worldview of me, but I was like, yeah. But I agree with Elaine. A lot of my friends who aren't churchgoers or believers, when you say Christian, and they're more on the liberal side, they're like, oh, because the evangelicals are so out front with their message and their politics. What Elaine said, I just keep saying, we don't get any press, those of us who think in a different way. And that might be an interesting something to take on, to provide an alternative that's seen and heard.
Sorry, from the Zoomers. Let's see. Gail says, diversity seems a key. Age, gender, race, their voices would give us a sense of how to move forward. Marie, yes, what Gail is saying is part of that new space, a place where all voices are heard. And Ed, the latest figures I have seen is the evangelical churches are declining also. Thank you.
In the book on page 73, I think this is something that speaks to, like, Elaine, your concern. And it says, in the present tense, I advise you, leave these men alone, let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it's from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God. So I think that what you're saying with things being very politically charged and a lot of the damaging theology coming out of evangelical churches, that's human. That's, I want to be more powerful than you. That's, I want human power on this plane. That's going to fail. That falls apart every time. Even if we don't get to see it fall apart, it's going to fall apart. Right. Right. And I think that we don't have control over that, but I think that it's like you keep doing the good work, you trust in God, you do good, you're on this mission, you're helping people, that will stand, right? We have a saying, your arms are too short to box with God. Yeah.
I have a book that I got in seminary actually and read it a really long time ago, but it's Walter Brueggemann's wait a minute. Prophetic Imagination. And so I was hearing those words here about prophetic imagination. And in the Old Testament, the prophets were critiquing people in power. And I think what this book is doing is critiquing systems, but also talking about the pain of critiquing those systems and how do we move through that pain, through that grief to the next place. And it's going to be a really slow walk. I think one, in terms of evangelicals, because most of us here are really opposed to the politics that have come out of the evangelical church, which is the Christian nationalism, that I think we do need in fairness to evangelicals. I am not a fan of their theology because I don't think that personal salvation is what Jesus was all about. That's a piece of it, but certainly not the whole thing. But there are evangelical churches, and maybe those are the ones that are dying. I don't know, but there are evangelical churches and leaders and people who are not part of the Christian nationalism. And what we're objecting to, I think, is really the latest, the last 10, 20 years or so.
My son and his family go to a church in California that's I wouldn't call it evangelical, but it's further in that direction than we are. And it's a growing church. It has lots of young people. However, Kevin thinks that probably the new people coming in are often coming from other churches, as opposed to other churches that aren't doing well or don't feel as meaningful. So that was an interesting fact for me, because it is a big church and it is a growing church. However, their growth is coming at the cost of losses to other churches. And And the other thing I wanted to say was, when Aaron died, I took a mantra of love will find the way. And it's been very helpful to me personally, but I think it's true for all of us as well. And obviously, in saying, and especially saying it for us, it means God will help us find the way through love.
Just had it and lost it, and we'll be back in just a moment. My first thought about the evangelical church is growing, which we now know is not as simple as it was 10, 15 years ago, was that there are a lot of people that want to be told what to believe. They don't want to come to their own conclusions. They want to be told. They don't feel like they can understand. But we're moving into an era where we are much more, as a civilization, more separated, more isolated. Programs lately on loneliness and separation, and perhaps what we need, and which some of the churches that are growing, is that they do have a sense of enthusiasm and optimism. And I think that's something that we need not to neglect as well.
So, I'll share all these notes. Dorhauer certainly reminds us that postmoderns, whoever they are, do not believe in universal truths. They learn differently from your cell phone, and they very often will not trust institutional authority. Since Church 2.0 still relies on clergy to interpret scripture and conduct worship services, Dorhauer believes that it is a good explanation why postmoderns have begun to abandon regular churchgoing. And he says outright, to the degree that you do not find meaning and comfort in worship services as they are conducted in your church, you probably already are postmodern. And I would suggest the opposite is probably also true. To the degree that you do find meaning and comfort in the doctrines and churches of our church, we are not postmodern. So postmodern isn't like, hey, I want to be postmodern. It's a phenomenon. It's not necessarily a trend. The institutional church is meeting the postmodern world, and the result, of course, is declining membership and unsustainable finances. Oopsie. More and more people are becoming postmodern, and they aren't filling our pews. Does that mean that all churches will fail? Does it mean that mainline churches will disappear and be replaced by some form of worship without clergy, without liturgy, without buildings? Of course not, because we need to remind ourselves that after centuries, millennia, Church 1.0 still exists. So it's not likely that Church 3.0 will replace 1.0 and 2.0. He doesn't have answers. Dorhauer doesn't have answers of what Church 3.0 might look like. This capital C 3.0, which is kind of a concept, but he does believe that it will have less role for professional clergy, less set liturgy, less systematic governance, and maybe not so many dedicated locations. And in his last few chapters, he gives examples of 3.0 type churches that practice Christianity that is moved by the Spirit without relying on clergy or liturgy, memberships coming and going, meeting in different kinds of places. And the question, I guess maybe we're not asking, but it is certainly being asked, are those heretical? Are they just vapid and and insignificant, insubstantial? Is that something too far out for us? In the meantime, what type of church, little church, will Doopsie become? What mission and missions will it pursue? How will we reach out? Who will we reach out to for our membership? The unchurched, postmoderns, the traditional? Those are the questions that Dorhauer is proposing and challenging us with. In the meantime, is this church, Downtown United Presbyterian Church, remember it did unite 50 years ago, is it succeeding or is it dying? If we keep going, doing what we're doing, we'll probably still get the same results. So namely, that is a membership that is declining and finances that are, quite frankly, unsustainable. But is that how we measure success? Through membership and finances? It comes back, and Dorhauer reminds us, it has to come back to what our mission is. How is going to church the same or different from being a church? Is this a church where we go, or is this an organization with a mission? Churches are not corporations. They're different institutions altogether. And when we think about DUPC, we realize that lives are affected. My life is affected. I believe many of our lives have been affected by this place and these people. That's why I keep coming back. Spiritual growth occurs through coming to these forums, I hope, through attending the sacred time and space we call worship, through listening to the sermons, the music, the time with the children. We support nonprofit organizations in this building and nonprofit organizations outside this building. We provide a safe space for people. Yet none of these activities are reflected in counting heads or counting money. So Dorhauer asks, how can we better measure the spiritual contributions of a church? We can't abandon these measures, membership and finances, completely, but we do need to acknowledge there's some usefulness to them because at least they're objective. But finances are important. They determine what we can do. They somehow reflect satisfaction with the conduct of the church. They reflect what the community feels about the church. And membership usually translates into pledges. They don't reflect everything a church is doing. They're necessary, but not sufficient to assess a church's health. And Dorhauer really encourages we look beyond the membership and its finances to measure the impact of something called church. So he had 4 points about how do you know if you're succeeding. First of all, measuring membership and finances are necessary. It's not mercenary to be concerned about that, but it cannot be the only concern. There is no mission without margin. We don't have a state-sponsored religion. It is a tough fact, but churches do compete with other nonprofits for attention and for money. The world no longer turns to churches for social connection or charitable activities. So despite our best intentions and their best intentions, most churches can't compete effectively with other churches or non-church organizations. That's why the church membership is going down. Those activities, those non-church organizations are hiring professionals to do their fundraising and outreach. We're relying on our pastors and some volunteers. Furthermore, clergy are not really trained. They're not trained for management and for recruitment. They're trained for liturgy and theology. And for many congregations, church used to be a major venue of social connection, and that is no longer the case. You used to come to potlucks and everything else. Finally, as we as members contribute also to many other charities, our loyalties are spread thinly. Charities that are run by professionals who are clear about their mission, their leadership, and their management for specific intentions. They used to be all under the umbrella of a church. So the old ways are no longer working, and any rebirth will depend on answering this question: what does this church do? What will this church do? And so we need to have some kind of new metrics, he thought, to reveal what churches are actually doing. But new metrics have to be dedicated and connected to new, specific missions. Dorhauer really wants us to change our perspectives. Focusing on membership and finances is important, but not if it neglects focusing on mission. The church, the capital C church, was birthed for mission, and little C churches like us are birthed for mission too, and we should remember that. So besides the membership and the finances, what does DUPC stand for? What mission is God calling us for? And do we have new ideas for new metrics? That I think, with our new pastor, I think that is kind of the session has, challenged him with those issues. Dora reminds us the church is a church when lives are changed through it and by it. How are we being of service? How are we being of service? How has our religious orientation changed lives, ourselves and others? How and how many people have benefited from our activities? How have we served others spiritually, not just, by money or time? And what do we bring as examples of Christian love into the world? If we claim to be Christians, how are we known by our love? And we can describe this. We can even count it, he suggests, just like McDonald's. He suggests to post how many people of church has served and keep that cumulatively updated. This week we served, how many people are here? 20 people. Okay, it's not, and then next week we'll have another 20, so that's up to 40. A tally would remind us and motivate us, inspire us, would bring the idea and the experience into closer proximity, better awareness. And perhaps occasionally, perhaps every week, perhaps every month, someone could provide their examples in service of how they were of service, how they brought church into their world. Dorhauer believes that testimonies about this type of authenticity, this spiritual authenticity, is key, as we can show how spiritual motivation is making a difference. It's not the money, it's not the bodies, it is the stuff that drops off us. Ultimately, the sustainability of the church will need fiscal support, but meanwhile, we can recall that our missions in the world and to the world, what are they? How can we become more mindful of our spiritual roles, those roles that are not transactional, those things that we're not being paid to do, but are feeling that we're called to do? Dorhauer believes, quote, whatever new growth is out there to be found is going to come from those who are not yet invested in and not yet committed to the church. So this church is declining. There is opportunity for meeting the spiritual needs in a different form. But to attract and engage them, a church will need to focus on defining and pursuing its missions collectively as well as individually. And that's, I think, what he's challenging us with. You can't rely on the old methods. So we're back to where we began. We're called to a mission. What are we called for?
So, perfect. What are we called for? Perfect. Thank you, David. I just want to remind us that we are downtown. So what does that mean? And who do we or how do we serve downtown, our neighbors, the people who live here? How do we do that? I wish that I wish that Carol Snook were here because she rattled off a few times ago various ways that we could serve downtown. Just one example was the gymnasium that we have that stands empty, that used to host a women's basketball team. I remember in their practice, not in games, but in their practice. But that's just one thing that comes to mind. But as you've been talking and listing off these things, that's the thing that has been going round and round in my mind. How do we serve downtown? Okay.
I agree with Elaine, and I think that builds membership by doing things that are around us, forming relationships, Spiritus Christi, Quakers, getting everybody more involved in serving, food cupboard, or lunches. I'm all about, kind of that micro connection with people, because that contact, I think, also gives you spiritual growth and attracts people without trying to do that as your main mission.
some online comments. Thank you. From Gail. Do you remember Ginny Davidson's ministry of the screwdriver, quote unquote, i.e. starting a new way of being by removing the pews? And then Marie and Peg, I agree with Susan Orr, who said we need to go forward and do our ministry and God's work. That should be our first priority. Do our ministry and God's work. Marie and Peg, and the first part was Gail Mott.
Our time is coming to a close. I think Nancy wanted to say a few things.
That's okay. Thank you, David. Let's give David, thank you so much. That was, it's wonderful examining all this. Thank you. And trying to get a grasp on things. I'm handing out a question, so to speak, sheet. Talked with David about that earlier, emailed earlier in the week. Just things to ponder, questions that have risen from Nancy Brown's presentation, the book, some previous emails and things, just things to ponder that hopefully we can touch on over the next several weeks. So speaking of the next several weeks, I know we had thought that we would have next week and the following week. Oh, sorry. Next, is this better? Sorry. Next week and the following week, but I think we may take a break. We want to hear from you from next week and pick up on the 10th and then the 17th. Or we could meet next week. We're kind of low on Sunday Forum people. So next week would not be a full presentation, but it might be an opportunity for discussion, which will also be part of the two additional presentations. So options are take a break next week, not have a Sunday Forum at all, and pick up on the 10th and the 17th, or have a Sunday Forum meeting for dialogue next week, and then the presentations on the 10th and 17th. Could I see, does that make sense what the two options are?
I think that Nancy was worried, frankly, that I can't be here next week and Carolyn can't be here. There's a little few technical issues with trying to project a video, doing the Door Howard video and just managing that. So we can try to do a low tech, or we can or skip a week and then come back the week. Do you think we need to have enough momentum to keep going here? Mary?
I wonder if somebody might be willing to lead a discussion of these questions.
There you go.
And I'll be here. I can do lots of scribing. Of course, this is a discussion, so I love how Susan Orr had said no answers as she started her presentation, but we're just talking through things. So could I see a show of hands for who would like to continue next week with just discussion and then two presentations subsequent to that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Oh, sorry. That was a lot of people for Zoomers who raised their hands, and that was the majority. Okay, so yes, we will have Sunday Forum next week. Stay tuned for more. But yes, the questions that just went out, we'll put those out on eConnect as well. And we look forward to seeing folks next week. Thank you, David.
That's March 3rd, and then on March 10th, it will be Leah Cohen, and she's going to, she's familiar with the book, and she will. No. I think the 3rd is going to be Nancy, and the 10th is going to be.
The third's the discussion. The last one is you, Nancy.
No.
To be determined.
No, the 3rd is you, or since everyone wants to show up next week. The 10th is going to be Leah, and the 17th, I thought that, we might talk about, but where are we?
So I think, I think next week is just a dialogue. And then the following 2 weeks either are going to be Leah, then me, or me, then Leah. I'm so sorry. Very, this has been a lot of staying flexible today. So.
And there's good energy, I think, right? It's good. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very helpful presentation from Ed Safer. Happy Sunday to everyone.